I am Caleb. I serve as one of the elders here if I've not met you yet. Just a couple quick announcements before we get into the reading and the preaching of the word. Number one, if you are new or new-ish and you haven't gotten into a life groups are just our next step for how to plug in and connect with the body. We have a class right after church today. It'll be upstairs. Joseph, where do you want them to congregate? I don't even know where you're at. Okay, I'll make a decision. Go to the lobby if you want to get into a life group, and then Joseph, who will be leading that, will grab you, and then we'll take you upstairs. Number two, we've got a serve day coming up on the 24th of February. If some of you may know this, but there's another local church here in town, Carmel Baptist, that has graciously given us, one, just a lot of money to do a lot of maintenance projects around here, but two, they're also giving of themselves. They're giving volunteers, about 50 people, that are going to come on the 24th of this month to serve. We would love to partner with them in that. We're asking for 20 of you to do that. The commitment is from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. that day. If you would like to serve, Seth, can you stand up, raise your hand? Great, that guy right there. Go talk to him after service. He will sign you up today so that you don't have to forget about it and we don't have to track you down. So 20 people, that's what we're hoping, that's what we're praying for. We would love for you to come and do that. So I'm going to invite Cheryl now to read the scriptures for us.
Good morning. You may stand if you'd like for the reading of Exodus 3, chapters 1 through 15. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look on God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good land, a broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? But he said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. This is the word of the Lord.
Father, even now, Would you still our hearts? Would you prepare our hearts? It's a beautiful relationship between the more that we learn about who you are, we begin to learn more about who we are. I pray for those in the room that maybe have a clouded image of who you are. May that be clear. And may all of us find freedom today that the Spirit provides. And a fresh wind to be commissioned. I pray that. In the mighty name of Jesus, amen. I was told a story of a man who, when he was a kid, he suffered some pretty serious abuse from his dad. To protect the confidentiality of the individual, I won't name any names, but he told me that when his mom passed away, shortly after he was born, his dad got remarried, but dad ended up blaming the man for his mom's death. So his whole childhood, all he remembers is getting beat, physically, emotionally, psychologically abused. He never felt safe. One time his dad abused his siblings so bad with a belt that he put him in the hospital. And at the hospital, the sibling was so scared to tell the truth because of what dad might do to him, so he lied and he said he fell. And by the time the man was old enough, he ran away from home, and the rest of his life was spent struggling, trying to just heal, trying to move forward, trying to forgive. He told me, I struggle to see God as a loving father when mine was so awful. It's a common phrase I hear, especially with those who grow up maybe with parental abuse. He also said, why would God ever want to use me or love me? I'm too broken. I'm too messed up. There's a word for this: shame. Shame can manifest from sin maybe you've done or sin that's done to you, but it's a deep belief that I am what's wrong with the world. I'm the mistake. And maybe your story or life has not been as tragic as this man's life. I hope it hasn't. But in some way, a lot of us have felt this. Maybe in the depths of your soul, you have uttered similar questions. Who am I, God? Why would you want anything to do with me? Do you even love me? And who are you, God? Or where are you? Can you be trusted? Will you help me? Have you ever asked any of those? This story is for you then, because we find Moses asking the same things, feeling the same pain behind these questions maybe you have asked. But he gets some perspective on who God really is. Because in Exodus 3, we see a God who is completely other, unique, holy, powerful, but we also see a God who is deeply personal and loving. He comes near and he's compassionate. He's a healer and he's a sender. We see a God who remembers, we see a people who forget, and we see how God chooses to get his work done. If you're a note taker, good luck. Chapter 3 is dense. It is one of the densest, I think, chapters in the Bible. And I'm going to try and do this in 49 minutes. So here we go. Verse 1, now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Last chapter, if you were here 2 weeks ago, we ended with Moses as he tries to figure out who he is and what his identity is. And now we're at this moment Moses has with God at Mount Horeb, where God reveals who he is and at the same time reveals who Moses is. Except Horeb is not exactly what we think of when we think of the mountain of God. We think of that as Mount Sinai. But it's not called that here. We actually don't get Mount Sinai until chapter 16. So what's going on? It seems that the narrator wants us to see this is the same mountain. When you read verse 11, that God is going to bring back the Israelites to this same mountain. But it's possible, two things. It's possible that this is Horeb, that the name of the area around the mountain is Horeb, like the wilderness Horeb. And the mountain is called Sinai, except when you get to Exodus 33, it's called Mount Horeb. So there might be some wordplay going on here. Because in Exodus 32, a bunch of Israelites go around and kill a bunch of people that were idolaters, and they kill them with the sword. We'll get there. It's messy. But they kill them with the sword, and so it's possible this could be wordplay on the word sword, which is cherub. Can you say that? Gotta get that phlegm in there, people. Yeah, deep guttural. Cherub. There you go. Don't spit on your neighbor. So the Hebrew word is sword. So it could be Mount Horeb. They're playing like a word play on there. But we also do this with a lot of things. So like Charlotte, for example, has a lot of nicknames. What's one that you know? Very good. Anyone else? Another one? Say that? Mint City. Very good. It is also called Mint City. It is also called the city with no good sports teams. I don't know if that's true, but it can be now. So it's possible that what they're calling Mount Horeb here, Mount Sword. That is possible. But it's also possible that Sinai is the name of the area. We do this, it's called a synecdoche. This is an English term. It's like saying all hands on deck. You are not asking only for hands. You're asking for whole bodies on deck. So you sub the part for the whole. It's also possible, again, this was known as Horeb, but it was changed. Let's get to verse 2. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why does this bush not burn up? So this mysterious angel figure, I don't have time to unpack who I think he is. We'll get to him when we get to the Israelites going through the Sea of Reeds and in the wilderness. But this bush, let's talk about it. This is not a typical bush. It's also not the typical word for bush. That word is seneh. Can you say that? It's a seneh bush. A certain kind of bush or a plant could also be a tree or a bramble. It's only referenced here on Mount Sinai, so it's possible that Mount Sinai, which uses the same consonants as seneh, this is a play on words with the bush, so it came to be called Mount Sinai because of the bush. That's possible. And a lot of you are like, this is so uninteresting. Why is this guy spending 5 minutes talking about horticulture? Listen, details in the scriptures are not random. We've already seen 3 chapters in Exodus, almost painstaking detail that the narrator goes into to make some points. For example, why is a thorny bush on fire important? Also, in the Hebrew, it says the bush, when it says the bush does not burn up, literally that translates to it was not eaten up. That's a weird way to talk about fire. And why is it significant that in verse 5, God says, don't come any closer, take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Remember in the Eden story, when God kicks Adam and Eve out, he guards the way to the tree of life with an angel with a fiery sword. A fiery cherub, like Mount Horeb. Remember what God tells humans with the trees in the garden. You can eat from all of them, but you should not eat the fruit of this tree. And now we've got a bush tree plant that has not been eaten up. Remember outside the garden, there are thorns and thistles, and now we've got a thorny bush. Remember before the fall, Adam and Eve walked with God in his presence, and now Moses is in the presence of God. Take off your sandals. You're on holy ground. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new kind of garden in Eden. At this point in Exodus, we already know that the author is incredibly intentional about making parallels to creation. Why? Because Exodus is not just a story about the rescue of an ancient peoples. It's your story, and it's my story. The beauty of promising start, the tragedy of present pain, and the way that God deals with all of that. Those are themes that are going to be told over and over throughout the scriptures. And God, like in Genesis, acts against injustice and evil, and he's about to do something here like he did back then. Verse 6. Then he said, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. But the Lord said, I've indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, and a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of all of those people. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, so now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So we've been seeing some foreshadows of this God through people. In chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus, we saw that through women, they were acting more like Yahweh than they were like Pharaoh, where Pharaoh saw a life as threat. These women saw life as good. We remember that Pharaoh's daughter, when she saw the baby and heard his cries and was concerned for him, that was borrowed language for what Yahweh does with his people. This is the God that has been revealed to us in Exodus 3, a God who hears and a God who cares. To help explain this section in Exodus 3, let's turn one page backward to Exodus 2. Verse 23, the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning. Again, we've got another hyperlink here to Genesis. The ancient Israelite would have gotten this immediately. If we rewind back to Cain and Abel, so Genesis 4, we have the first act of injustice ever recorded in human history. Cain brutally slaughters his innocent brother Abel because he was jealous. And at that moment in the story, God's voice breaks through Genesis 4. Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. That word for cries out in the text is the Hebrew word se'akah. Can you say that? So se'akah means cry of the distressed. It is the same word used in Exodus 2 for when the Israelites cried out. Why is that important? Because injustice makes a sound that God hears. He is the one who hears and acts. This is the God that Moses discovers, and se'akah gets repeated in Exodus 3, verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them, se'akah. Because of their slave drivers, I'm concerned about them. You see, repetition in the scriptures is really important. In English, to get someone's attention, you bold something or italicize it, or you scream at them in all caps via text. I will not answer you quicker if you do that to me. But in the ancient world, in an oral culture, literary emphasis is repetition. This is all caps. God hears the cry. He cares and he will act. Back to Exodus 2:24, when God heard their groaning, he remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he looked on the Israelites. He was concerned about them. So not only does God hear and act, but he remembers. See, in Genesis, God makes a covenant with Abraham and Sarah to grow their family into a nation. We've got that nation here. To bless the world through this people. This is God's redemption plan. But he remembers. Over and over throughout Genesis, it says that God remembers when Hagar left home, about the atrocity that was done to her from Abraham and Sarah. She was homeless, traveling with just her infant son. It says God remembers. Rachel and Leah, through suffering the abuse from Jacob, it says God remembers. Jacob, in the wake of Laban's deception, God remembers. All of these memorable scenes, all of them involving some sort of injustice, and all of them God remembers. And the Israelites cry out. And God remembers, which begs the question, what did God forget? Short answer, nothing. Terence Fretheim is helpful here. This does not refer to like some jogging of the divine memory, as if God had forgotten promises made. No, to remember is to be actively attentive to that which is remembered. It is a divine sense of obligation to prior commitment. In other words, God remembered is a literary way of saying God has consistently acted. He has consistently acted in the worst of human evil. And that's also how we can expect he will continue to act against evil now. We can trust he always will because he always has. He keeps his promises. He remembers his covenant. Please hear this. The section in Exodus 3 shows that God is not absent-minded or arbitrary. He is good and consistent. And when you find yourself in distress, crying out to God, you can expect his action. But his action to the praying person, however, may not come how I expect it or desire it, or most certainly not at the timetable I want it. But you can expect it. It's coming. Verse 11, but Moses said to God, "Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." And Moses said to God, "Well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? Then what should I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." This is what you're to say to them. "I am has sent me to you." And God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." Okay, this is dense. So I'm going to kind of go through a couple sections here. First, what God is doing here, he's revealing his name to Moses in 3 statements. And what we have translated is "I am who I am." It's actually in the Hebrew, "I will be who I will be." It's the future tense. So that word there sounds like a sneeze. Yeah. You don't have to do that one. But what God is doing is first he's saying, "I will be whoever I will be has sent me to you." And then it's changed to Yahweh, and that's the present, "I am." And there's a lot of speculation as to why that is. I don't know. That's the easiest way. I'm not sure. It might, one scholar said, just because yeah is really hard to say. But the other is that God is gradually unveiling his personal name to Moses. He will flesh out the meaning of his name by acting on their behalf. So I will be is saying, let me prove to you who I'm going to be. We see this later in Exodus 34 when he unlocks more of his name. But why does Moses ask God's name? As I see it, there's 5 possibilities. Number 1, no one knew Yahweh's name before this. I'm not convinced by this one because throughout the book of Genesis, the name of Yahweh is used 162 times, 34 of those being on the lips of people talking. Exodus 4:1 also suggests that the Israelites knew or were familiar with God's name. So it says, Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, Yahweh did not appear to you? So it is an assumption that maybe they already knew. I'm convinced they did. Number 2, Moses didn't know Yahweh's name. That's possible. He grew up with Egyptians. Maybe they did not know Yahweh's name. The third one is that Moses is just confirming his identity. Again, that's possible. This is a polytheistic context, so Moses is needing some verification, like, who are you exactly? Number 4 possibility, the Israelites forgot God's name. And the reason this is compelling, number 1, the narrator's use of Elohim in Exodus 1-3. Dan preached most of my sermon already when he told you that Elohim was used before Yahweh here in Exodus 3. The midwives in Exodus 1, they refer to God as Elohim, not as Yahweh. Again, Elohim is a title, like doctor. It just means God. They didn't address him by his name. And we don't get that name until Exodus 3. Then he said, I am Elohim of your father, Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at Elohim. And then Yahweh said, do you see that switch there? So the choice of words could show that somewhere along the way, again, 400 years of enslavement, the Israelites just forgot God's name. It's very possible. Deuteronomy 6 and Joshua, they are urging the people not to forget. Do whatever you have to do, like tattoo it on your body, write it on your doorpost. Don't forget. That's possible. Humans just forget. Another possibility is that they did not know the extent of God's name. So this is a gradual revelation of his name. And in Exodus 6, it says that, then he says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, but my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. So where Noah and Abraham maybe knew the name of Yahweh, they did not know the extent, the full impact of that name. I'm somewhere between 4 and 5. As I see it, it's very possible that the Israelites forgot Yahweh or they just knew of him through a game of telephone. Have you played that game before? Okay, do that for 400 years. It's very possible. Or they just really didn't know him. But wherever you land on any of these possibilities is not so much the point for me. The point is somewhere along the way, they could not trust this God. Because they either viewed him as some faraway deity or they just didn't know him. They forgot the stories of old because they neglected to pass down the stories to each other. Whoever Yahweh is or was doesn't matter because he's abandoned us. He doesn't care about us. Again, what's interesting is the dance between the words here. Verse 11, but Moses said to Elohim, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And he said, I will be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship Elohim on this mountain. And then Moses says to Elohim, well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me to you. And they say, what's his name? What should I say to him? And then Elohim says to Moses, yeah. That is what you're to say. I will be. And then verse 15, Yahweh. So whether Moses forgot his name or knew his name, but not the extent of it, here's what's important. Moses still calls God by a title, showing distance. There is not relationship here. But you see in Exodus 3, we learn about a God who gives his name, which shows relationship. He's not far away like we have dreamed him up to be. No, he's one who invites humans into relationship. See, we learn about a God who reveals his cosmic plan, who is holy, he's set apart, he's uniquely other, but as big as he is and as committed as he is to follow through on his promises, he comes in close. He gives Moses an invitation to go and reveal his name to a people that didn't know him. I mean, it's beautiful, but Moses objects. Did you see that? He objects with two questions. But Moses said, verse 11, "Who am I that I should go?" In verse 13, he says to Elohim, "Suppose I go to them and say, the Elohim of your fathers has sent me. What is his name? What should I tell them?" So basically what Moses is saying is two questions. Who am I? And who are you? Who am I, God? Why would you send me? You see, if you remember from last week, we've got a man who struggled with who he was. Moses was a Hebrew born among an oppressed people who grew up in the household of the oppressors. He grew up where everything that he grew up in was purchased on the backs of his own people. Let's humanize him for a bit. He grew up. He was a man before he left Egypt. I mean, you have to wonder, looking at the people from down below, looking at his own people being oppressed. I mean, he had a complicated upbringing. And finally, in chapter 2, it appears that Moses, he'd had enough. He raged against an Egyptian slave driver, killing him in an effort to try and help one of his own. And the next day, he risked being included with his own people. And what do they say to them? Are you going to kill us too? Rejected by his own people. The very thing that he had kept hidden became exposed, and he ran. And by running, he demonstrated that there was a part of his life that he believed was a place in him where grace could not touch. There's a word for that: shame. And when invited by Yahweh to be a representative to these same people he tried to make amends with, but they rejected him, he says, "Who am I, God?" Because shame is a storyteller. It gets a grip deep in us. See, guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am what's wrong. My existence is wrong. In Will Smith's memoir, he talks about how as a kid, he witnesses his father abusing his mother in the living room. And he says he just froze. He's the oldest kid here, and this is a defining moment. He talks about where he could have and should have stepped in to defend his mom, but he doesn't. And then his little brother, who's standing behind him, walks past Will and steps in to defend his mother from his father. And Will says, this is the defining moment of my life. It is one I have never stopped living over and over. The one I've tried to protect myself from ever being again. And the one I've tried to prove to everyone that I'm not that person anymore. That's shame. It's the part in me that I believe that grace cannot touch. Instead of God being the author, shame becomes the author, and it gets deep in us. See, the first time that I ever really experienced shame, like a debilitating shame, I was in middle school. It was 7th grade. I was at the lunch table, and lunch was about to be done. And someone at the table said, I don't want my brownies. Anyone want it? And it was one of those like fudge brownies with like the rainbow crunchies. You know what I'm talking about? Not sprinkles. I don't like sprinkles. I get the irony in that. I hear it. And I guess I said, I don't know, loud enough maybe for like the whole lunch table to hear. I didn't think I did, but I was like, yeah, I want it. And I will never forget what was said and done to me because it has shaped the past 19 years of my life. Caleb, you don't need that. You're fat enough already. And then the guy beside me who said that turns to me and takes his finger and jabs it into my stomach to prove some point that, yeah, I still have some middle school pudginess. And it was in the midst of that laughter, I was naked and exposed. And that one moment led to years of an eating disorder, battling body dysmorphia. When I got to high school, abuse continued, trying to fit in, hoping I could change or become something or change something about myself so that these guys would like let up on me. Also not feeling any safety at all from the coaches who would chime in. When you are so unsafe, you get desperate, and in a month, at 14, I lost 30 pounds. Maybe this will get me friends. No, it just added more ammo. You see, shame gets in your bones. I could not buy anything without hating everything in the way that it looked on me. I could not walk past a mirror without looking at it and seeing, am I thin enough? Yeah, I'm better now. I don't have a toxic relationship with food. I like baggier clothes, but listen, shame, it's that part in me that believes that like grace can't get there. But here's the beauty, is that though I have wrestled with such brokenness and obsession to be loved and valued, He redeemed me. Now I'm a pastor. He lifted my eyes to see that I wasn't hopeless, because this is how God gets His work done, through healing one broken, shame-filled person at a time. A life verse for me has been Isaiah 43, where He says, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name, you are mine." And Yahweh, this God who reveals Himself to Moses as I am who I am, would reveal Himself to a group of guys and girls on the Sea of Galilee in Mark 6:50 and say, "Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." You see, "it is I" translates ego eimi in Greek, which means I am. The great I am that Moses met would come into his creation in flesh and deal a decisive blow on sin and shame. Hebrews 12, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of God. So how does God get His work done? He heals a person's shame, and he redeems them. He forgives them, and He heals them. One person at a time. So when Moses asks, "Who am I?" God's response is, "I will be with you." God's answer to that question shows that question itself wasn't the right question. It isn't about who you are or what you've done or who you perceive yourself to be or your lack of self-image or anxiety. No, this is about who I am. Moses, you are forgiven. The fate of the world does not depend on your broken past, but on who I will be. And when Moses asks, well, who are you? God's response is, I will be who I will be. You can't pin me down. I will reveal myself on my own timeline. I will show my character as you see it unfold. The Father, listen, is reaching out with the same love and forgiveness and healing, inviting you into the same call he gave Moses. I am who I am. I will be who I will be. And he's simply saying, come follow me and watch me show you who I am. And because he's the one that does the saving, he's also the one that does the equipping. He doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Let's pick up in chapter 4, verse 1, and we'll close here. Moses answered, well, what if they don't believe me or listen to me or say, the Lord did not appear to you? So I'm going to skip verses 2 through 9 because we're going to unpack those when we get to the signs later, but I'm going to jump back in verse 10. And Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. And the Lord said, well, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? It's not I, the Lord. Now go. I will help you speak. I will teach you what to say. Well, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, well, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you. He'll be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. And I will be with both of you. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. And he will speak to the people for you. And it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. So we've already talked about two objections Moses made. Who am I and who are you? But he says, well, what if they don't believe me? So God responds with signs, various signs that Moses can do to confirm that he's had a divine counter of some kind. It's in a card trick. These are things that will show Moses has divine authority to bring this message. God asks, well, what's in your hand? And this is important. Listen to this, because God doesn't say, let me bring some random thing in. What does he do? He uses what Moses already has. I mean, that will preach. God has already provided everything Moses needs to do the job. So the next time you look at yourself as not good enough, wishing you looked different or sounded different or had more spiritual gifts, wishing that you didn't do that thing that you did, may you see the way that God sees you. Because God took a man who grew up in a household of an oppressor and benefited off his own people and also had a stutter. God took that man and delivered millions of enslaved peoples through Moses. He's the one doing the saving. He's also the one doing the equipping. And Moses is like, I'm clumsy mouth. Well, God says, I will be your mouth. And the reason that's important, because that means that there's no part of you, Moses, that will be away from my presence. And Moses is finally like, okay, please just send someone else. That definitely frustrates God. But even in his anger, he gives an option that still includes Moses. Do you see that? He reiterates that God will be with both Moses and Aaron. He doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. He always gives us what we need, and honestly, just what we need is him. He is who he is, and he will be who he will be, and he's inviting us even now into the journey of faith to let him prove to you his faith, shalom on earth as it is in heaven through the prayers of his people. And he's reaching out to heal you of your shame, your broken self-image, your anxiety, insecurities, reaching out with forgiveness. Why? Because there is more grace in him than there is sin in you. Hallelujah. So let's stand. I'd invite you even now, the practice for this week, just in prayer, I'm going to invite you to allow the Spirit to show and reveal, where do you need healing from shame or fear? There's something about saying that disarms it. Saying that to a friend or to God. Giving God access to those areas where you don't think his grace can reach. I would love to talk as well if you want. And ask him to give you confidence and assurance that he is with you, because he is the one who equips you. So even now, let's just create a little bit of space just to reflect and process. And we'll go to the table. Father, your servant Moses found that day that the same God that brought order out of chaos would be the same God that would deliver from chaos a people. The disciples discovered that the same God who rescued their people over and over and over would be the same God who came among them and walked with them and ate with them. But this God would rescue all of humanity from chaos. May we be a people who sees the I Am as one who has done all of these things. Will he not act on your behalf? Son and daughter of the King. Father, even now in Jesus' name, will you bring healing to those areas in our soul where we do not believe grace can touch? Because there's so much more grace. Father, even now, would we not look to the left and the right, comparing ourselves to people, but seeing that it is you who gives us everything that we need for the journey of faith and the mission that you have called this church to. I pray against that spirit of competition. We make one body. There's not one part that's more important than the other, because without it, we hurt. We need everyone. Father, heal our shame and deliver us and commission us and equip us and empower us. I pray that in Jesus' name. If you have not gotten the elements, I invite you to do so.